Welcome to the last session of the pre-disruptive innovation days. And this covers the period from 1983 to 1985, which was approximately 2.5 years. Um, and This was after we got married in January of 1983. So the marriage was kind of quite uneventful, except for one thing which I remember was where there was a person, like an older person from my family, whom I didn't know very well, who, after we were married, came and told me rather, that I'd done a very bad thing by marrying a girl from outside the Bhargav community, because if good Bhargav boys married girls from outside the community, what would the Bhargav's girls do? Now, the answer obviously is very clear, that they will also marry outside the community. But this older person obviously didn't understand that. And it kind of illustrates that at that time, and maybe some of this continues today, but to a much lesser extent, that the older people were quite insensitive. They felt they could say anything that they wanted and get away with it. So anyway, after we got married, it was the middle of January. It was really cold. We got married in Delhi. And then we went to Ooty for our honeymoon via Madras and Coimbatore. And remember having a very good South Indian meal in Coimbatore at a restaurant called Annapurna, which was really nice. And then on the honeymoon, my dad had kind of booked a guest house for us, which was quite nice. And also had earlier stayed there, so he had left a whole set of instructions, some of which were helpful, but that was the way he was. He always liked to leave a lot of instructions and things. Then after we finished our honeymoon, we had a reception in Madras. And the interesting thing of that reception was that neither Anita or I knew the people who attended the reception, because my father had moved to Madras relatively recently. And we were staying in this huge house on RDR Road called 75 Shemias. It was, or Shemias Road, 75 Shemias Road in the RDR area. And this house had a very, very large property. The house itself was very large. The bedroom that we were in was probably 2,000 square feet by itself, like really huge. But the result was that, like, my father's friends in Madras, we knew hardly any of them, and they were company people. So after a while, we got tired of standing on the dais, and we started mingling with the people who would come and trying to get to know them, because we were getting very bored. But finally, we landed up in Bombay, and we stayed in a place called Ramanika in Daulat Nagar, which was in Bandra at the end of Linking Road, so very close to Juhu. And it was next to a slum which was called Daulat Nagar. Now I remember that because to get to work, I had to initially either drive my scooter or take a bus and go to through the slum, which was a small slum, but it used to get full of water, and every now and then you were brought back to the reality of India by walking through the slum. So we were very close to us was Shankar and Meenu Day. Shankar also worked in Citibank, and their son Rohan and our son Sahil were almost the same age, um, and they were good friends. So a few stories from that time. Uh, One was that when we moved there, I had made arrangements for our furniture to come and all that, and then I requested Shankar to help with getting the things unpacked, and I sent him a mail saying, make sure that the beds are sleepable. Right? So that became quite a joke in Citibank, and I had to live that down. Later, once like, um, so Anita used to kind of wait for me to come back from work, and once I came back with relatively high fever, and she was so sort of concerned that I just said, "Oh, I don't know, I think I'm dying," and I then went to sleep. And she got so panicky that she ran to Shankar and Meenu. And then when I got up, I saw all these people looking very worried. And I told them, "Look, I'm fine. I had this fever, but it's better now." So anyway, so those were kind of interesting days. We had a very, very long commute, and doing that commute in the rain was quite troublesome. And like once, there was a strike, the trains were not working, so we had to take a taxi. And I forgot to phone Anita. That was not the day of cell phones. That you know, I will be taking a cab, and then the cab really got stuck for a long while. So I ended up coming home like really, really late. But then, like Anita was really worried as to what had happened and why I hadn't showed up. So also, like Anita had a look at my paycheck, and there were these deductions for tax and all that. So the paycheck was pretty low for the months of February, March, and January. So she sort of panicked and said, "Wow, I've got to manage with this money, and maybe I've got to take up a job." And she then decided to work teaching in a college. So she taught at the St. Andrews College, um, and started working. Now, also, I got promoted to become a manager at Citibank. And one of the things was, as you got promoted, you got these perquisites. So we ended up getting a cooking range, which was a super flame cooking range. And interestingly, that range, when we moved to Thailand, we gave it to Anita's mom. And that's been with Anita's mom since. And now that Anita's mom is in 403 Aradhana, the range is still there. It still works. And she likes it a lot. And the range is probably as old or older than Sahil. So at least 35 years, this cooking range has been working. So at work, because I was thought to be like a technology person within Citibank and with a good knowledge of operations, Citibank had decided that they would try and move the Citibank branches from manual to a computer system. And Citibank had a computer system which ran on prime computers, and the software was written on a language called AB Armstrong Basic Plus. So this was a system that they used worldwide. Now in India, computers were not allowed, and the bank unions were very much against getting computers into India. But the Citibank decided that they were going to do a project to figure out all the stuff that needed to be done to get computerized, and that they would also work in parallel on convincing the unions. So at that time, of course, you also needed a physical data center to keep the computers. It had to be air conditioned. The computer was not huge, but it was still pretty large. And the power of that computer is much less than the power of laptops today. But at that time, we had to do this major project to move the bank from manual to computers. And I was made responsible, and I was the project manager for this project. And I was still quite young, and I'd spent just a couple of years in the bank, but I was entrusted with this responsibility for this rather major project, which included all aspects of negotiating with the unions, drawing up a PERT chart, for the entire project, including the construction of the data center. So initially I had to go for training to Hong Kong, where we had to spend about 4 months trying to understand this whole system inside out, how it would be set up. So there were two people from the business side and two people from the technology side who were on this team. And we stayed together in a place called Jardines Lookout in Hong Kong. Great deal of fun. And we enjoyed Hong Kong. Anita also visited us for about a month or so while we were in Hong Kong. And there was a person called OP Sharma who was with me on this project. And the interesting thing about OP was he was a person who had become a manager at Citibank, but he had progressed from the ranks. That is, he had started as a clerk and then worked his way up. And he was from North India, very a Punjabi. And so basically, he was quite different from me in some ways, but it was a good combination and we enjoyed each other's company. He was like really desperate for Indian food. Found the food in Hong Kong quite difficult, while I was quite comfortable. So occasionally we did manage to eat Indian in Hong Kong. So this project was very, very interesting because I had to write a user manual for every single aspect of the bank, whether it was foreign exchange, whether it was bill discounting, whether it was trade, whether it was retail operations and things like that, as to how they would operate in this computerized environment. And I had to train them, and I also had to build a conversion plan. So it was a massive project, and it was just OP and me, because the rest of the people were carrying on the business. And, it was hard to also get time to train them. And then it was also quite uncertain as to when exactly the computers would come, when the data centers would come in, and the union negotiations. So the union negotiations were very interesting because the head of the union was a person called Pejawar. And there were like the clerical staff in Citibank were paid very well compared to the clerical staff in, say, other banks. So they recognized that, and it was, but at the same time, the unions at that time were led by a person called Datta Samant, who was quite a violent person. So it wasn't just that, the unions were something that you could negotiate with very easily. Fortunately, I didn't have to negotiate with Datta Samant. I had to negotiate with Pejawar. But I had to be conscious because Pejawar would be talking with Datta Samant, and he had to, even if he supported it, present an argument which would work with Datta Samant. So initially, the conversation started off on a fairly negative note because Pejawar told me, that you people from IIM, Ahmedabad, and all these kind of things, you guys are sucking the blood of the country. We are the people who run the country, and all this kind of stuff. So I told him, okay, let's not get emotional here. See, the thing is that if Citibank doesn't computerize, it will quite likely close down shop in India, and we will all have to look for jobs. Now, for people like me, because of my track record and my IIM degree, I will probably find a job as good, maybe not as good, but pretty good. And I can rise, and I'm at the early stage of my career. But what will you people do, right? So for you, it's going to be difficult to find a job, and even if you do find one, it's going to be pay you much, much less. And here, Citibank's telling you that if they computerize, they're not going to lay off anyone, and they're going to increase your salary. And if the business does well, which it will, because we will be computerized while other banks will not be, then again, your salaries will go up. And you're a small bunch of people, it'll be. So now let's sit down and devise strategies where you could save face with Datta Samant, and we can go ahead. So finally, an agreement was reached that Citibank would be allowed, and there were all kinds of strict conditions on Citibank of no layoffs, increasing the compensation for clerical workers. And the way it was sold to Datta Samant was that, look, once it comes, you'll at least be able to observe what happens with computers, and you'll be able to negotiate for other banks if they want to bring in computers, and Citibank's a good test case. So on that basis, Datta Samant allowed Citibank to bring in computers through the union, and we crossed that hurdle. So this was the stuff with Cosmos, getting it live, the unions, the per chart. Now also at that time, in March of 1985, Sahil was born. And I think we went live with Cosmos in India around April, or pretty soon after Sahil was born. Now, for me, dealing with this project, because this was the most crucial stage, the conversion stage, going live and all that, and also dealing with a newborn baby. Not that I did much, Anita did everything, but still, Sahil was a colicky baby, and he would be crying at night at times. And when I'd come home, and we were staying at still far away at Linking Road. So, I would be working 16 hours, then commute like an hour, then commute back. And then even the few hours of sleep that I had, they would be interrupted by this crying baby. So I told Anita that maybe it's better that you go to Delhi. And then I moved into Ambassador Hotel, which was quite close to the branch. And then after the conversion was done, Sahil and Anita came back. Now the conversion and this whole process of going live, which is a very, very tricky process, went off like really well. And then the stuff was quite smooth. And so I was given a lot of credit for this happening, and my credibility in Citibank was quite high. Now, after we were live, another incident that happened was that we had one of my father's eldest brother's wife, who was a widow. She wanted to visit Bombay. And I said, yes, sure, please come. I'll take care of you. But then there was a fire in the data center, and I had to be there. But she insisted on coming. And then it was quite a drama taking care of her. But Anita did that. And but again, it's like the older people at that time, and maybe even now, can prove to be quite difficult. And they don't recognize the stresses and strains that young people have to go through, especially related to their jobs. So anyway, because this project went very well, I was kind of rewarded by being moved to Cuff Parade, very close to the branch. And my commute was history. Plus, I was made a AVP. So with an AVP, we got 2 air conditioners, but most importantly, we got a car. So my days of the scooter were over. pretty soon. And I became an AVP quite soon after moving to Persepolis. So the people in Persepolis, they saw me initially with a scooter, and then they saw me getting a car, and later on, a bigger car. And then we moved to a building called Venus, and then we got transferred to Thailand. So they were saying, what an amazing place Citibank is, because I moved to Persepolis in 1985. And by 1989, all this stuff had happened. So this is where the pre-disruptive innovation story ends. And the continuation will be found in the disruptive innovation sessions. So in disruptive innovation, have been quite fortunate to find a lot of success as a player, and all that is captured in those sessions. But if you are looking to learn and learn from my disruptive innovation journey, then you might want to pay a little bit of attention to these sessions as well, though they are pre the disruptive innovation, because some of these things, in my opinion, helped shape me and put the foundations in place for my success as a disruptive innovator. So thank you very much for listening.